My story actually started down in Texas. Um, I moved there when I was a little girl with my mom and her boyfriend. He had absconded from probation, which he was on probation for vehicular manslaughter. So their answer was to jump states and start over down there. We got there, and he was abusive towards my mom. He broke her jaw one day when he was on heroin. And of course, as a little girl, I wasn't familiar with the substance use in the home, but I was familiar with the abuse. And so I grew up like that for a little while. My mom did eventually leave him and started working for a major liquor distributor in Texas, who the owner kind of took us under his wing and took care of my mom and I. And so what that meant is I had full access to liquor all the time. I grew up playing in the owner's office where he had a fully stocked bar. And so on Saturday mornings, I'd watch Smurfs and pretend like I was a bartender, or just run the warehouse and do whatever I wanted. At home, Mom had a fully stocked cabinet full of alcohol. And one night when she was out doing something for work, I had convinced my babysitters to let me get into that fully stocked cabinet. I was 8 years old and had my first blackout as a result of that. And then later on, tried cocaine for the first time when I was 12. That was a situation where we had moved back to Kansas, but we were going to Texas almost every weekend visiting my mom's boyfriend at the time. And Mom had gone to bed, and he introduced me to the cocaine, but he had a hidden agenda. So thankfully, by the grace of my higher power, he was not able to fulfill that agenda. After I froze and I was able to get up and go get in bed with my mom. But that was the start of what unleashed my anger. Because leading up to that point, we moved a lot. When we lived in Texas, we lived there 6 or 7 years, and we moved 11 or 12 times. So just when I would get comfortable or get friends or anything like that, we were uprooted and moving. And I lived in an environment at home where it wasn't the healthiest environment, obviously. So at the point that the boyfriend introduced me to the cocaine, we came back to Kansas, and it was reported back to my mom in a different way than how it happened. And so I was in trouble, and it unleashed my anger. And from that point on, I just acted out of rebellion, acted out of hurt and pain, basically. But I didn't know how to put the words on it at the time. So instead, I continued to rebel by skipping school, hanging out with boys, having sex at an early age, all that stuff, right, that comes with the territory of addiction. That led me to ending up in foster care. And so at the age of 15, I was in temporary custody of the state of Kansas. My parents still had an opportunity to let me come home, and so they were actually privately placing me in group homes while the state was looking in. But I hadn't dealt with that anger, and I was continuing to use more often. At that point, it was alcohol, primarily. But I was going to drink just as much as you were, if not more, right? Because I was angry, and I was going to prove to you that I could do what you were doing, no matter who you were. And so that continued for a while. I ended up in treatment at 15, got kicked out of treatment because of my anger. I played softball, and I was really good at it. And I threw an apple at a girl's head, and it splattered on the wall. So I couldn't stay. But eventually they let me come back. And when I came back, I still had the rebellious spirit and a lot of the anger. But I was surrounded by staff who, they knew how to approach that. They were loving, they were gentle, they were kind. And so they challenged me to memorize the 12 steps of recovery. And I did. I was more than willing to take that challenge because I'm also very competitive. So I memorized the 12 steps. I didn't realize seeds were being planted, but they were. When I got out of that second treatment episode, I was put into full custody of the state of Kansas. At that point, I had to go into a group home long term. And despite my efforts of running away from the previous group homes and getting removed, this time it was different because I was all in full custody of the state. And so I had to face the situation. I had to face myself eventually. It took me about 6 months to get there, fighting the staff, really acting out at this point, jipping school, not being where I was supposed to be, all that stuff. But the state put me in Prairie View, which is a local mental health hospital here in Kansas, and I had to stay there for about 6 months. I had to go to school there. I had to do everything there. Couldn't leave the campus. And that was the point that I had to face myself. And I had to start working on acceptance. Even though I didn't want to be here and I did everything I could to get out of this, the only way to get out of it was to go through it, right? And so for some reason I was able to realize that and settle down just enough to do what I needed to do to get through high school and get through that experience in the group home. So in 93, I graduated high school, graduated from the group home. I had a full scholarship for softball at Kansas Newman College here in town, and I was ready to go. I had a bright future ahead of me, but I had a whole summer to get through as well. And I had to leave the group home because I graduated. So I went back home, and home was okay. But my my mom had gotten married, so it was her and my stepdad, and he's a Shriner, and so he did a lot of shrine things, and there was a lot of drinking involved at those things. Well, as I was doing the healing and what I needed to do at the group home, they went on with life. And so me going back home was very awkward and uncomfortable at times. At that point, I'm not 18 yet. I'm almost 18. And I had done some healing, but I didn't have a lot of emotion regulation. And so instead of dealing with the feelings, I did what I knew how to do. I'd met some gang members when I was in foster care. I looked them up and I started hanging out with them when I turned 18. And so from 18 to 20, instead of going to college and utilizing that scholarship, I went to college and got kicked out for my attitude, my rebellion, and started running the streets. Now, at age 20, I did end up getting into some legal trouble, got some legal charges, and got put on probation. I was looking at prison, but again, my higher power stepped in, and that was not the plan for me. Instead, I got put on probation. And I ended up having a PO who, she was a hard ass. She drove me, but she knew exactly what I needed. And I will forever be grateful for her. And once I started doing what I needed to be doing to become a productive member of society, then she became a supporter, right? I mean, she was a supporter all along, but it was known at this point she was supporting me. And I needed that, and it felt good to have that. And so it was very encouraging. And so I started going back to school, started doing things to get my stuff together. I got put back into treatment, even though I wasn't using at this point. Because of my history, I had to go back to treatment. And again, that was another divine intervention for me because I ended up going to a outpatient program owned by a husband and wife here in town. And again, they were very encouraging. And so things were being lined up at that point in time that I needed to not go back and do what I'd always done. So I started off in school to become a paramedic. My goal was to be a paramedic, get my RN, and go that route. I ended up getting pregnant, and I couldn't figure out how I was going to work in a paramedic schedule with a newborn child. So, I was already contemplating what I wanted to do. But when I was at school one day for EMT class, I sat down on break and there was a flyer beside me, and it was a brand new addiction program being started. And this is like in the late 90s. So, but anyhow, I just seeing that flyer and how I felt instantly, I knew I needed to switch gears. And so when I left school and I went home that day, I stopped at a local treatment center and I walked in and said, I want a job. I don't know where, I don't know what I'd be doing, but I want a job here. This is where I need to be. And then I went to school and I switched. I got enrolled in the addictions program. And I felt like I was at home. I just knew it was where I belonged. At this point, I wasn't really working a program of recovery. The father of my child wanted me to choose between them or those people that go to meetings. And so I started my career in the addictions field, not going to meetings, not plugged into the community, not doing any of that stuff because I chose my family and I was young. And that's just the decision I made back then. The father of my child ended up getting shot the first year we were married. He was working in rent to own and he got robbed and he got shot. He survived, but that started a series of surgeries and disabilities and situations like that we had to deal with. So the point of that is that, for the longest time I stayed sober. I stayed dry, if you will, working in the treatment world. And I figured because I worked in the field and I talked about it all day long, it was okay. I didn't need to do all that stuff at home. And at home I had a lot going on, a lot of distractions happening. And so it made it easy to make that decision at that point in my life. But what was happening was I could just feel like my soul drying up. My soul wasn't being fed. There wasn't enough. And I was miserable. I was just completely miserable. So I made a few efforts to try to go to meetings through the years that I was married that first time. But it always ended up in a fight. And so I always chose to just say, forget it and stay home. Again, I work in the field. It'll be all right. Well, he ended up developing a narcotic addiction from all the pain meds and stuff. And it was a very volatile marriage. So we divorced after about 12 years, 3 kids later. I kept the house, the minivan, and the kids. And then he went off and did his thing. And that sickness, that being sick and tired of being sick and tired, that emotional bottom just kept coming to the surface. And for about 6 months, I couldn't get up off the couch other than to go to work because I knew I had to pay the bills and to take care of the kids' stuff. But when it came to taking care of me, I just laid on the couch, feeling sorry for myself, depressed. I had met a friend at one of my son's football practices. She was a party animal. That girl was going out every night and on plenty of fish and doing all these things. Well, I didn't want to do all that, but I was living vicariously through her. So I'd go hang out and, and check out and listen to her adventures from the night before and all these things. She was finally able to get me up off the couch doing that. But because of who I chose to surround myself with, somebody who was actively using, eventually I did give in and I started drinking again. It took about 3 times of going out, 3 times of drinking that year to realize and remind myself of who I am. My name's Heather and I'm an addict, right? And even though I want to drink, 1 is too many and 1,000 is never enough is very true for me. I will tell you I'm going to go to the bar and be done at 11, and then 3 o'clock you're dragging me out of Denny's parking lot, right? I am that person. So I made the decision to start going back to meetings about a year into my divorce. It was a messy divorce anyways. He didn't want it. Took about 2 years to get it. We had to go to 2 rounds of mediation to get to that point because he fought everything. And so I started going to meetings to quit drinking, But I also continued to go to meetings because of the emotional support and the love and the encouragement that I was getting, because I desperately needed that at that point in my life too. And the more I went to meetings, the more I got involved. I started leading meetings. I started hanging out with people outside of the meeting halls. My life became a lot better, and it came to life. Like, I was surviving before that. But when I got involved with recovery, my life began to have a life of its own, and it felt really good. And so at this point, I was now working in foster care. I decided to step back from the addictions field and go into a life skills position. And that was a really cool experience that kept motivating me to keep doing what I was doing. I ended up replacing one of my old counselors from the treatment center. I ran into an old case manager I had at a group home I was in. But this time I was working with these folks and building a different kind of relationship with them, which gave me a whole different level of motivation. It was very inspiring and fulfilling, enough so that I returned to school and pursued my bachelor's in social work. And then eventually I went on to get my master's in social work. And currently I'm working on my clinical license in social work, which is something I never, ever thought I wanted to do or would ever do, nor did I think I was qualified to do. But because of my friendships and the fellowship that I found in recovery, I was able to become or get to a point where I could believe that. And not only believe it, but actually sample it and try it, and then eventually know that, you know what, I can do these things, right? I can't do them alone, but I can do them with the love and the support that I have found in recovery, which was very strong. Currently, I'm remarried. I found my partner in recovery. He had been sober for about 5 years, 6 years. I stopped going to meetings a few years ago after we got married. We got married. We were doing the honeymoon bliss thing, and everything was great and good. And then my eldest child developed an addiction to narcotics. And so there's been a lot happen with that. And again, my patterns haven't changed. The busier I get, the more distracted I get. And the more I take my focus off of where it needs to be, which is on me and my recovery. So these last few years, I had been kind of dry again. This year, I've been slowly making my way back, starting to go to meetings again. I plugged in with some friends that are helping me get my clinical license, that are like-minded, not just in recovery, but in career and in life in general. And currently I'm trying to make sure that I maintain those things, because I know from firsthand experience, if I get unplugged, I just get miserable. But if I'm plugged in, the sky's the limit, right? If we just stick with it, there's no telling where we can go from here. So that's my story in a nutshell. It doesn't matter whether you want this or not. If you know that you need it, just start where you're at and go get it. If you want it, again, just start where you're at. I mean, there's no right way, there's no wrong way to get started, right? The only requirement is a desire to stop using for the 12-step program. And if the 12-step program isn't for you, guess what? We have harm reduction. And I'm a big proponent of that. I know that contradicts, and there's still controversy with some 12-step believers, and that's okay. They have the right to hold their beliefs. But I know that at the rate we're losing people today, I can't afford to hold on to those old beliefs when I work with people. And so just start where you're at. You know, if you want to go to meetings and still smoke weed, go to meetings and smoke weed, right? If you're not ready to quit using completely, entirely, but you know something's got to change, and you've heard that going to a 12-step meeting can be inspiring, go anyways. And don't worry about the naysayers, right? Because they're only doing what they know how to do, okay? And there's a lot of people in the rooms who haven't yet come to understand. You might be an expert on your recovery, but that doesn't make you an expert on mine or somebody else's, right? And when we try to act like we are the expert, or it's only this way or that way, that's part of why we're losing people. So that's my answer, is start where you're at.